Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Yeah, good. Thanks. And yeah.
Can't complain. All good. I got just this week or today actually access to the OpenAI's GPT-3. They've
Oh,
been
cool.
handing out accounts. So I've been playing with it all afternoon, and wow, it certainly is a thing. It's certainly um, I'm still trying to get my head around what it means and what it can do, what it can't do, but the few shot idea is quite interesting, like because it's trained on the common crawl set, which I don't know what that is, but I gather it's a good chunk of open web. So you give it enough hints of what the topic it is and a few examples, and then it sort of digs into it. Like there's some examples of writing SQL, and I thought I would do one, and I swapped the SQL and told it I was doing GraphQL, and it did, good semantic GraphQL, and no one that I know I've done that before, like that it knew about GraphQL and things like that, and the way it can classify things and generate things, and yeah, it's a bit. In some ways, it feels like a weapon. Like it could be weaponized, like for generating content, and like how easy it would be to have a few shots to train it to classify something, for example, a resume or something, and then have it pick things out of that based on some context you set. Um, it's yeah, it's interesting. Do you have access to it, or have you applied for access to it?
I haven't played with it yet. No.
No, it's supposed to look. The current version of it is like a SaaS, so it's API only, like a very simple, deceptively simple API that's like text in and text out. But you can even have it, work with tabular data if you tell it that it's tabular data and put little table markers in, and yeah, it can translate between say Python and JavaScript. It seems pretty good at the top programming languages because they're often crawled, like the information's crawled off GitHub. And I've heard, I haven't tried it yet. I started looking at log output. I didn't have much results with that, but I've heard when people hit bugs and exceptions, there was a company that was playing around with it. Um, if it's hitting some bug that's in some public bug report, it can often summarize that for you. That's another thing it does very well is summarize large chunks of text, depending on how much summary you want. Like I was trying that with my son. It was fascinating. Like we were giving it, information about the French Revolution or Franz Ferdinand. He's into history, and then having it summarize in one line, and it's like, oh, that's pretty good. Like it plucked out the points from Wikipedia. So it's a force to be reckoned
I
with.
think it'd
So
be interesting to see what the quality remains like on things like that. Because if you think about it, the amount of bad code that's posted on the internet far
yes,
outweighs the amount of good code.
yeah,
So will it learn to code really badly in
yes,
terms of what it's actually picking out? Um,
yeah. It's certainly for code generation. I haven't seen anything like it. I think for more structured data, that it wouldn't be too hard to beat it if you know the domain. But yeah, I had it. I was giving it gobs of Python that I was working on, and it sort of would suggest like reasonable function names and that, but then it wouldn't really go much deeper. And hilariously, at some point, I would be put a bit more code in, and all it would suggest was doing more indentation, which I thought was pretty funny for Python. Like it's just like, oh, I see you like spaces and tabs. Have some more spaces and tabs. Like it did, like
yeah,
it wasn't the depth. I could tell it wasn't going super deep, but it was like invoking functions that it had written before that had sensible names with, using an appropriate parameter, like conventions like using df for data frame. Like it was some ML code. So it could kind of match and recognize the sort of area you're writing, and I think it's for smaller chunks it's interesting. and maybe CSS apparently does a good job there, and maybe some Markdown, HTML, writing SQL statements, sort of those little expression things. Something where there isn't a higher, you don't need to understand the higher level, like stuff that's a bit more context free. I think it's probably, but yeah, it will be interesting. But
it's also a good way of discovering niches where machine learning solutions could actually add value in specific areas. So, for example, if you had a machine learning model that genuinely understood the correct spacing for a YAML document, that would far exceed any human capability.
yeah, yes, that's right. I mean, yeah, being able to both write and generate and comprehend, which it seems to be pretty good at both. Yeah, that's. I mean, it's a funny example, but it's not unreasonable. Is like being able to describe in sort of your own terminology the context you said of like, I want to change these things to this, and then it says, oh, this is actually how you do it, and because it knows, and then it could do the reverse and take a gob of YAML and then describe it as a one line thing of, this is what it does, like a Kubernetes config or something. Like that's not an unreasonable thing, and it seems to be able to do things like that. It seems to be able to digest it down and summarize things. It was pretty good. I even gave it I gave it some output of some building from some code being built that was ultimately Maven, and it gave this summary. I was telling it to do a summary. That's one of the things you can do. And it was sort of describing, oh, it's using Maven, and it's checking if it was saying in plain English, like checking if there's a JDK version 8 and installing it. It was doing all these things it was like, well, that's, when I look at the logs, that's what I would have said, partly from what I see in the logs and also from what I know of how Maven works. And so it's got that common crawl context in its model, and then it's had a few shot examples that I've given it. Just as if someone that's read the material before is then prompted, oh, we're talking about Maven and Java now. So I thought that was fascinating. So I've got no idea of the machinery underneath, like what sort of models, but I know it's obviously a deep model, and they just kind of scaled it out with just an incredible number of parameters. Like it almost was like a research project to go, well, what happens if we just let it come up with billions and billions of parameters, and but not fundamentally change it from a deep network. And yeah, that's what they ended up with. So it's fascinating that people are doing it. But yeah, I can see why they're being super careful with how it's used and why it's an API. And it doesn't take much to sort of hit a thing where it sort of flags it and says, we think this might be problematic, the content. And then you can whitelist it, but you can tell it it's a false alarm. They're being I think they're taking a lot of these things we've talked about to heart. They're on the bleeding edge of it, so it doesn't surprise me. But whoever's behind this has put a lot of thought into preventing misuse.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting situation because, at some point it will reach a density of information that means it can be quite congruent about a broad enough range of different topics that it starts to look a lot like a human in terms of its ability to say something plausible in a very wide range of areas. And then there's that question of, we keep getting stuck on this idea that we're building super intelligences that will be, intrinsically better than humans at everything. But in reality, practical intelligence is always full of mistakes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and it could just be doing that
yeah,
at a faster, more impressive scale, but doing the same mistakes. Like,
yeah, but there comes a point in terms of, we stop being able to instantly recognize the mistakes in humans once they get past a level of experience, and they just become believable at that point, even if they're wrong.
hmm,
Um, and there will be a threshold with these models where the model will appear to have human-like capabilities, and will start to become intrinsically trustworthy as a result, because it seems to be congruent in what it's saying on everything you throw at it.
yeah. So you
Um,
start trusting it,
but you,
and yeah,
yeah, and it doesn't
yes.
have to be perfect to do that.
No, I mean, a human isn't perfect to do that. Like, you have CEOs and leaders, and everyone knows they're flawed. They know they're flawed, but at some point you go, look, this is the best worst option. Let's go ahead with it. We don't have perfect information, and so yeah, I could totally see people sort of giving over to a machine. That's yeah, it's closer to that than I thought. Like, it was, yeah. Obviously nonsense comes out, but yeah, it's a fascinating way they've done it, and they've made it easy to integrate into apps and things. So it'll be an interesting thing. It's the whole process of training that model is interesting. Like, it's from the MLOps point of view, like what do you even have to say about something like GPT-3? Like, what was the rumor cost? Like $4 million for their training run. I don't know if that was like the total accumulated cost of the AWS bill for the project. Maybe there was some false starts, and maybe they, tuned hyperparameters and started again, or maybe, the mistakes were made, or whether it was the final training run that succeeded and is the model that they published or that they allow you to use. Like, I wonder if that's the cost, is $4 million. Like, that's like an astounding amount of energy
Wouldn't
consumed to
surprise
do that. And yeah,
It wouldn't surprise me if that was the cost per training run.
right. It could get that big. Yeah. It's yeah, whereas I think about the models I'm training, it might be 10 minutes of training run, and maybe under a million parameters. So pretty modest. It's very structured data. It's not images, it's not raw text. It's relatively simple. And in that case, it's very much like, to me, the analogy is very much like compiling code. So I can use normal-ish test tools and apply normal practices and things. And the challenge is more that it's more probabilistic in how you test things rather than deterministic. But for this, this is all of those other concerns that we talked about come to the fore.
But
Nothing
I
else.
think
Yeah.
this brings us on to something that's very relevant at the moment, really. In terms of what the impact of this type of technology is going to be on DevOps practice in general. Because there's been some discussion this week um, between some of the CDF projects where there's quite a strong difference of opinion in terms of whether MLOps is actually part of the DevOps process, or whether it can be safely ignored and as being somebody else's problem.
Hmm.
And I think it's very clear from technologies like this that uh, there's an immediate role for this sort of technology in the DevOps pipeline itself.
Hmm.
If you're uh, if you're taking your pipeline logs and feeding them into a model, and then having the model monitor all of your pipelines and tell you in plain English what's going wrong and suggesting fixes, uh, that is going to be a massive productivity boost.
Yeah, is that
For,
that application of models, is that like some people use the term AI ops for when AI technologies, be those trained models or some other thing that's classified as AI is applied to operational data. So logs, metrics, monitoring. That my understanding is people would tend to call that AI ops, even though it's not really ops in this case. It's like AI applied to DevOps practices.
Yeah,
That's
but
yeah. Sorry.
the point I was trying to make really is that um, the this sort of technology brings the opportunity for big productivity advances in many of the things that it touches, and DevOps itself will not be immune from that.
Yeah.
And so the work that we're doing to try and align the DevOps and MLOps worlds is actually quite important, and we need to make sure that we're doing the appropriate level of communication and evangelization to get everybody on board with this, because the risk is that projects that don't factor in ML ops and AI ops into their thinking run the risk of becoming irrelevant quite quickly,
Yes.
as their users start to demand
Yeah, functionality that you can
radically
only.
improved
Yeah,
functionality.
I think of some of the models I've been building, and they're a much more modest scale to sort of your neck of the woods. Like, because the data is more tabular, it's more modest. It definitely is something that any developer could kind of do who has an interest. Like, if you've got any reasonable system now has a lot of data, and we're building more and more on existing databases, existing APIs, and existing services. Like the era of like a Heroku app with a fresh Postgres database that you populate with a to-do list, like that's 2005. Like, we're now building systems with huge amounts of existing data. Everything's always connected online. There's no offline anymore. So there's lots of other data that you can bring in very cheaply or easily. So it's now about what else you can do with the data. And I don't know, to me, training and deploying models feels like sort of web developments at the turn of the millennium. Like, it was a thing people did. Not all developers did it, but then it took off. It's like, it sort of feels like it's that. There was a blog post from someone called it Software 2.0. Like, it's just, instead of writing things by hand, you've got a modest model would be between 100,000 and 10 million parameters that are tuned in a typical training run. That's far more than a team of developers could ever do, and then that can change day by day. So, like, it just seems like it's something that all developers should do, rather than just a team that has data scientists and then the developers over here. There'll still be that as well. Like, there'll be people who really specialize in the data, or you've got a very sensitive domain and things like that. But I think there's a whole lot of low-hanging fruit that the APIs are a bit strange, but not out of the realm of things. Like, I think back to if you'd done client server stuff in the 90s, and when you came across the web, that was pretty weird. Like, we're both old enough to remember that transition, and probably earlier. Like, this is not really that different. Like, understanding what a data frame is and what a feature is and how that's subtly different from other things. That's not out of the reach of a developer. Like, I don't think. So I think I totally agree, and I think there could be teams doing it that don't even have data scientists. They're just well, I know there's people doing that. They're just working it out. There's plenty of material out there. The documentation's great. My only sort of complaint is I'm forever coming across notebooks and then going, oh gosh, I have to go, and it's half the time they don't work, and I'm forever taking it out of notebooks and just putting it in regular Python code with unit tests and stuff.
So perhaps what we need right now is is a model that gets really good at taking stuff out of notebooks and putting them
Yeah,
into a
and then
proper MLOps
I,
format.
I think Netflix did, or someone did publish a tool that did that, but they wanted to let their data scientists stay in the notebook land, and that is kind of the reality for a lot of companies. I mean, I'm sure you know about Databricks. Like they're a huge sort of open source success story, and I'm sure a lot of that is powered by they have their own way of running notebooks and things like that. That's yeah. I think notebooks are a reality for a while yet. I can certainly see the benefit. I have started using this other library called, I'll post it in here in the notes. It might have been someone here that suggested it. I don't know, but Streamlit. It's a. I'm gonna paste in that document. It's a web framework written in Python that lets you very quickly. I can't seem to paste the document. Are you able to edit the document? Okay.
Yeah, I edited it earlier.
That's all right. Never. I can type, but I just can't copy and paste. Streamlit.io. Yeah, it's this tool that kind of natively works with the constructs of machine learning libraries. So data frames, data sets, the various plotting tools, taking simple inputs, and it does it as a responsive web app. I think it actually uses React, but you don't ever see that. You just say, I want a number input, or I want a slider, or I want a drop down. Here's the data frame to pop the values. Show me the data frame, or pass it to this. So it's kind of got this. You can very quickly put sort of data heavy stuff on the web. It reminds me of, it's kind of like Rails was to databases back in the 2000s. You could go, look, here's the table, just show it on the web and customize this and that. It's like that, but for machine learning concepts. So I think that's something that things like that could excite developers and get people interested in doing it who aren't, sort of notebook centric data scientists who like to have the notebook where they're, explaining and justifying the data, whereas the developers want to mostly see the results. Like being able to graph something in a notebook is all very good, and explain why you normalize this thing this way is all very great, but a developer wants to put that in a unit test and have it pass fail. So I think that was interesting. That's something I come across and start using. It's very easy to host. You can host it on some sort of serverless platform. I've been using Google Cloud Run, so you have just a single Docker container that fires up when it needs to, and it's a neat tool. There's the other thing is I found a few conferences. I'll see if I can post them in the notes here. Why isn't it letting me?
You're not logged into the document, so that might be why you're not able to paste.
Is there a trick to logging in? Like,
you just need to be logged in your Google account.
I'll try it with my work one. I'm currently signed in as. So that's me as Anonymous Dragon and Anonymous Turtle, but I'm logged in as me. I've got my icon at the top right. Maybe if I send it to you in the chat here, you could paste it in. Save some time. So there were 3 conferences that came up that I thought would be interesting to sort of the non-data science audience. Spring, obviously CDCon, and All Day DevOps. There's probably some others that have come up since.
Yeah, so I'm still waiting to hear whether our slot for CDCon has been accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that will go ahead. I've started a conversation with a group in Canada that are doing a DevOps focused conference. So it's possible we might be able to get a slot there. And just made contact on AI Camp. So I'm going to ask around there and see if there's any interest in us doing a slot for them.
And do you have like have you got some content that you talk about already, or a slide deck or some starting material that others could use if we're, because I'm struggling to think where to start. If I was thinking the first thing would be I want to do sort of either a personal or a corporate blog post talking about this, but I'm struggling to find the entry point. So any sort of past presentations.
There's the CDCon talk that I did last year, which was an overview of what we're doing and what the goals are. But I haven't got a specific deck, because what I tend to do is just talk through the
the points itself. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what's a good catchy entry point for the audiences I'm thinking about. Like, for example, Spring One, they're developers that are curious to try sort of the next thing. So the angle for them would be, well, there's bound to be something in there that is interesting, like, or controversial maybe. It's always interesting to have something controversial. How it can be abused or something.
Yeah, and I think what we should probably start to do is watch for examples of the things that we're predicting, and then make sure that we're producing blog content that links the example back to the roadmap, and because that's a good way of getting people to pick up on real world examples of things that they haven't considered before. So other activities that are going on at the moment, you've probably seen I've created a draft 2021 document in the repo, so that's now available for
I saw you mention that. So and that is in the roadmap 2021. Yep.
So that's all good to go now. I'm also working with another CDF SIG that is putting together a best practice document for DevOps, and I'm producing some other content for that, and we're also going to include MLOps as part of that document.
There was something I came across today that I was wondering if it was covered. Last year was the IP that's contained in a model. The example was, so I am looking at training models on our own data, eating your own dog food, applying that. And then some of that model is relevant to another customer. Another customer signs up, creates their own account with their own set of data. But the model trained on customer A is partially relevant for customer B, so you can transfer it over, do another fit, fit that to customer B's data and basically transfer learn, add a bit more to the model. And as you get more customers, it gets smarter and smarter. Not all of it's relevant, because there might be specific things learned in a model that are relevant to participants in customer A. Like there's, different users in customer A that behave certain ways, and it's learned that they won't exist in customer B. That's fine. The model can understand that, because it's a big space of numbers. They're not going to think that that person is that person, but other things are in common. Like there may be certain dimensions of things that are the same. So like, who owns that IP? Like, you've trained a model on your customer data, another customer's data, third, fourth, fifth. It gets smarter. You as the vendor benefit, and your customers benefit. But you're effectively using their data to train up your model. Yeah, Custom's got to go. Like, what are the issues around that IP? Or maybe there's no issue, because this is how things like search engines and whatever work. The more people use it, and recommendation engines. When you go to Amazon or Netflix, or you search on Google or whatever, you're always participating in an unknown way in a model that's retrained. So maybe it's not a big deal. But it seemed like in an enterprise setting, it was more explicit that you could have discrete models. Like, you could have separate models trained per customer, and there's no connection at all. You're running a SaaS or whatever. But that, it seems like the benefit would be to transfer, learn, and grow the knowledge. But then, do you own the IP? And I think we did cover this in the MLOps, where if customer B then leaves, and according to whatever regulation, has their rights for their data to be scrubbed, then the model has to be retrained without their data, right? That was one of the scenarios we covered, I think, but I didn't know if we talked about like the ownership of the IP.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the next big challenges in information technology in general. And I know I've been diving into this quite deeply with the IEEE on the IRDS roadmap. I can't remember if we've also included some of this in our roadmap, but it's certainly worth having a check to make sure. So the scenario becomes very obvious when you look at industrial applications. So, for example, in the semiconductor industry, there's a lot of work going on in providing AI models for fabs to help manage the process activities that are going on, and to evaluate the quality of the wafers that are coming out of the process. But what you have in that situation is quite a complex mix of IP, because the fab is owned by one company, and what happens within the fab is effectively their IP. So their recipe for running the fab is their IP. But the fab itself is made up from a large number of pieces of equipment that are bought from different vendors and interconnected into one or more lines within the fab. So, each piece of equipment is covered in sensors and capable of generating a large amount of data. And so that data is intrinsically used to control the piece of equipment, but can also provide valuable information about the state of a product that's running through the line. So there's work going on to build models to help run the equipment better at the vendor level. But then there's also a desire to have end-to-end models that are optimizing for the product.
That is almost the exact same thing as what I'm looking at, but obviously not fabs and hardware, but it's that same idea of you've got, a customer specific model and then an overall. Yeah.
But the challenge that you've got there is that each piece of equipment is effectively doing an operation based on an operating model that is the vendor's IP.
Yeah.
And they're doing it on behalf of the fab owner who has ownership of the arrangement and the settings for the equipment. So that means that if you're running a meta model on top of this, there's a risk that you're actually effectively modeling the IP of the vendor of the individual pieces of equipment, because you're capturing inputs and outputs and learning about what that thing actually does as a result of having access to a lot of the sensors that it uses.
Yeah.
So you've got this multiple challenge of you have some intrinsic IP over the line that you've constructed, but there's also inherent IP in each of the pieces of equipment on that line. And then there's a third problem, which is that you want to be able to pass this data up and down your supply chain, because you're only a piece of the bigger puzzle where your end customer actually also needs a model to understand.
Yeah, so that IP then leaks outside, and this is, and I mean, if it was all contained inside the fab owner, then you could understand no one would. It might technically be a problem, but no one's really going to fuss about it because it's never leaving. But what if that fab owner wants to sell that knowledge as a model, or like you said, it's part of a wider supply chain? Then, I mean, if you imagine that the models were hand-coded algorithms, written by a developer that wrote the millions of parameters and unit tests and whatever, then I guess you could, even that would be complex, but you could probably solve that. Like, we have copyright for that, and we have copyleft libraries, and there's fair use, and there's API surfaces, but in this world, there's no developer tuning these models. The system is kind of building it itself. So,
but
like,
also what you've got here really is it's a commercial problem, in that actually nobody's going to care that much as long as they're getting paid as a result of the data being used. So what's needed is the right commercial framework to allow people to cross-license this data, have some level of monitoring and trust building to ensure that abuses aren't happening, and then a payment model so that people are getting paid fairly for utilization of things that are intrinsically their IP. So what needs to happen, and this is what the recommendation has been through the IEEE, is that we start to work on a standard model for cross-licensing in these scenarios, so that what you're effectively doing by building the superset of these things is you're creating a new product which is jointly owned by
it's a derivative work, the same as in software licenses. You consumed another one, and depending on its license, you are now deemed a derivative work. And if it's some kind of Apache like MIT license, then that's no big deal. like it's, yeah, sure, it's a derivative work, but it's still your own. If it's GPL, then it's viral and so on. Like it's well defined
Now
in software and somewhat tested. But yeah,
what I'm
this is,
interested to see is where we see the first example in the sort of social space where a company decides to treat their aggregate data as a cooperative, where it's effectively paying its users for the contribution of their data to the overall product quality. So, you're using a product, you're paying to use it, but you're also getting some kickback or dividend from your contribution to that. And I think that's going to be very interesting because it will actually encourage more lock-in to a solution. Because if you get involved in a product early on and become a member of that cooperative, then your data is actually earning you some value, and as that scales, you're potentially earning significant enough amounts that it makes you want to stay with the product, and because you feel a sense of co-ownership. The challenge is in building manageable solutions to actually track and maintain those
I mean, it's
relationships.
there's companies, I've heard of companies or new companies that are looking at publishing models where the model is the IP that they sell, like natural language understanding in a specific vertical domain. So they've spent a lot of work accumulating the data and training it, in medical or accounting domains and natural language understanding. And so presumably they ship you a model or you use it as a service, but let's say if they ship you a model, it's some binary, you can then add to that. You can, correct me if I'm wrong, but you could then, load up that model, assuming it allows it, add more data to it, train it, adjust the parameters again. And so you've created a derivative work, not just by using it, but by retraining it. Like it's, yeah, that's the analogy of software, is like you take in that case, that's like taking their source code and modifying it. You're not linking it in that world. You're actually modifying the source code.
Yeah,
I always
but I
have
think
to,
if we go back to your
yeah.
go back to your original scenario where you have a service provider that's training models, and then a series of commercial users who want to benefit from that model, but are also providing data through the system which can be used to improve the model. Under this approach, what you could do is commercially license your relationship with each of those users such that you have a written data usage agreement that allows you to consume pseudonymized content to improve the model, but at the same time provides a dividend to that company that is paying them for the use of that data, and then that company has the option to pass on that dividend to individual users if what they're doing is aggregating data from end customers. So you get this chain of data sharing agreements with a commercial element to them, and then everybody's getting paid for the value that they're creating.
Yeah.
which makes them more likely to want to share.
Right. All right, I'm gonna have to sign off. Next time it'll be earlier in my time zone so we can talk longer, because I'd love to go back into this because this is like fascinating. I think we should dive a bit deeper on the IP and maybe start fleshing it out.
Yeah, I
But
think
yeah,
it's
it'll
worth
be.
us writing the section on this.
I think it is. Yeah, it's because it comes up a few times when I talk to people, and it'll certainly come up once people understand. It's explained to them, and they're like, "Holy crap, what are we doing here? This is, yeah." So good to get in front of it. All right. Well, I'm going to sign off and talk to you next time round at a better time zone. So that'll actually be really good. And
Right, take care.
otherwise,
Look forward to
see
seeing
you.
you soon.
Yep. See you on Slack. Bye.